Everyone, I think we'll make a start. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Objective Technologies event in partnership with ConnectWise, the State of Cybersecurity Yearly Outlook. My name is Charlie Norris. I am part of the IT team at the wider Ethos group of companies, and for anyone who might have certain questions or concerns regarding their current cyber practices following today and would like to learn how to become better protected, I'll be part of the team that can work with you and alongside your account managers to get under the skin of any issues you might be facing. After that, I'll be able to pass you over to one of our two presenters for today, Jason Pine, Managing Director of Objective Technologies. So Jason, very good morning to you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Charlie, and welcome. I guess for everybody. So yeah, a bit about me. So I'm Jason. I'm the MD here at Objective. Been in the kind of IT space for about 30 odd years or so now in various roles, predominantly kind of strategic consulting for SMEs. So my role here, Objective, really is to just really continue that we focus on continuing that we're delivering that sort of cost-effective, flexible solutions for clients. A bit about us. We've been in business now for about 16 years. Recently joined the Ethos Group in July 22. We're based in Hampshire, but we have a sort of national reach. So we support clients sort of large and small across the UK. We've got a great presence actually in the children's services and childcare provider sector. So we support a number of the top 10 UK independent fostering agencies. ConnectWise, so we've partnered with ConnectWise for about 12 years now. It's a great partnership. We utilise a range of IT sort of service management and tools from ConnectWise. These kind of form the backbone of our sort of business operations and service delivery here at Objective. And we've more recently sort of leveraged the global 24/7 security operations centre, which is now a sort of key strategic element to our advanced cybersecurity solution portfolio. So today what I'd like to do is just hand you over to Leigh, who's got a wealth of information to share with everybody. So Leigh, hopefully I can hand over to you now, if I do the right thing with the slides.
Yeah, I'll just take control now. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me here today. Just, I suppose, a brief introduction of myself. I'm from the MSP space, from the small to medium-sized businesses, but also done a lot of work in enterprise. I've always been very interested in IT all throughout my career and just following where the challenges are. And it's probably no surprise that some of the biggest challenges have been around cybersecurity. So a lot of focus in terms of what I've been doing has been around that area, particularly around InfoSec, particularly around IT governance for the business, and then the technology and tools you need to help you manage those scenarios. We're going to focus on a few things today, and what I wanted to do was sort of paint a picture really, what's happened, what's got us to where we are today, what's been happening in the recent year, and then what do we think is going to happen in the cybersecurity space. And Jason will then follow up with some recommended actions, the types of things that you can look at in terms of being cyber resilient. It's obviously a whole lot more. You could speak all day about these sort of things, but we just want to paint a sort of picture of what that looks like, and then hopefully you'll be able to spend some time and follow up with these guys. So starting out, when we have the past, so this is what cybersecurity used to be. Not quite that far back, but I do like a bit of steampunk, and so the image was fitting for that. But we're going to go back to 2013. And the reason why we're going back to that time frame is ransomware. Now, ransomware as a principle has actually been around since the 1980s, believe it or not. But it didn't really get recognized as to what it is today until about 2011. And even then, though, it didn't become mainstream until 2013. And then we started to see some sort of well-known ransomware services, CryptoLocker, CryptoWall, Tesla Crypt. And all of these programs have the same thing in common in that they're a piece of malware that runs on a device and they encrypt the data on the device. And then you have to pay a ransomer some money to get the encryption key. Frequency attack was pretty low, but it did start. And, you know, personal story, I had a laptop and I used to do research from it. And I got a ransomware in, I think, 2015. And it really wasn't that sophisticated. I could see what it was doing. I was able to stop it. I was able to reverse most of what it had done. I had some backups, but things have moved on a lot. Next one we'll look at is 2015. And the reason we're looking at that is because it's the first time we saw successful critical national infrastructure attacks on a large scale. So up until this point, it'd been largely theoretical. We had some other ones, but this was a major attack. And this was actually an attack on the Ukraine power grid. It was called Sandworm. And that caused mass disruption, power outages for 250,000 people. So we first saw the first significant attack where IT could directly affect the infrastructure of a country. Move forward a little bit and we had 2017, actually kind of linked to what happened in 2015 because it was part of the same series of attacks as they developed. Now, we ended up with a ransomware called WannaCry, and this was developed by a North Korean group, Lazarus Group, and the reason why this became so public was because it ended up impacting the NHS. So primarily original sort of variations of this were aimed at places like the Ukraine, but it evolved into this variant of WannaCry, and this particular one, it hit the media. So I was working in MSP, we had a patch management solution, and when people realized that you get hit by something just because your patches weren't up to date, we went from about 15% of the organizations we worked with patching regularly up to about 80% in a month. It was very visible, and the direct effects were very visible. What would happen if you weren't keeping your operating systems up to date? We move on a little bit further, another year. Everyone will think, great, we've got this under control now. We're patching. We're up to date. We know how to stop attacks. And then this became visible, and we realized that, you know, there is some problems that you can't just patch. But in particular, this was Meltdown and Spectre, and these were vulnerabilities which were built into the hardware of the CPUs. Predominantly, it was Intel that were impacted the most, but AMD chips were to a lesser extent. But the point was here that this wasn't just a simple patch. There were multiple things you had to do. You had to apply firmware updates. You had to apply updates to the motherboard. You had to apply updates to your operating system as well. And it had a massive performance impact as well. Overnight CPUs were 50% slower because they couldn't use part of their instruction sets. And this really highlighted, as much as you have a patching solution, you also needed to think about, how can I scan for and understand what my vulnerabilities are? Otherwise, you don't capture things like this. Roll forward a little bit further into the sort of tail end of 2019, going into 2020, we had the global pandemic. And what happened here is that technology changed very rapidly, and the way people used it changed very rapidly, and there was home working. And in order to do that, there was a lot of unsecure connections, and cybercriminals really took advantage of that. They saw a big opportunity, and ransomware that had been using before, they suddenly realized they needed to extend their net, and they developed ransomware as a service. And ransomware as a service is an affiliate program where a small number of developers, coders, the people that build the ransomware, essentially sell those tools out to an affiliate network, which are just, you know, normal people with access to the dark web that go, yeah, I want a bit of that. I want to try doing that. And they go out and they run these programs and they attack targets. This meant that ransomware just expanded exponentially. So over a very short time period where a large number of people were being attacked by ransom, and we saw, you know, quadruple fold, six-fold, eight-fold increases in attacks in ransomware because of these affiliate programs. Roll forward a little bit further, 2020, so almost the same year, we were also seeing supply chain attacks, and specifically we saw a very large supply chain attacks. There's since been many more, but this really highlighted the concept that threat actors were going after the developers of applications and trying to install backdoors, trying to install bugs into the development of that software. And this one in particular was SolaraGate, and this was targeted at the SolarWinds software. And this is something that's still being investigated today. There's still impact and fallout from that. So it had a big impact, and it really highlighted the need to monitor the supply chain, have better controls over the development of software as well. We roll forward a little bit further and into 2021, and this is important because this changed the global outlook on what a threat actor was. Now, we had things like the critical national infrastructure attacks on the Ukraine, but they didn't change how people viewed it. Those were viewed as that was a country attacking another country. We had in 2021, we had an attack on the Colonial Pipeline. And what it ended up doing was interrupting the oil supply in Northern America. And one thing which annoys Northern America probably more than anything else is anything that impacts their oil supply, right? And what ended up happening out the back of that is it got immediate attention at a presidential level, and threat actors were relabeled as cyber terrorists. And it's an important distinction because once they started labeling them as terrorists, they suddenly had additional powers to go after them. All of a sudden, the borders extended. These were Interpol would get involved, and they would really go after them. A lot of the threat actors from that group were later rounded up and arrested. Not all of them, and you'll find that's a common theme. As much as the law enforcement can do, they can never stop everything. So they went after people and labeled them as terrorists. So it was a big turning point in what a threat actor was. This pretty much brings us up to present day. And we're just going to recap on a few things that have happened in the past year so you can get an idea of where are we, what's happening recently. Recently, issues have become a lot more complex. It's really accelerated again. And it kind of doesn't matter who you are now. You are a target. So you can be the Microsofts of this world, and Microsoft got hit with a large-scale attack this year. You can be the Met Police. You can be the various different law enforcement agencies, and you can still be attacked and breached via supply chain attacks. And it's really just highlighting that the issues are far more complex than just yourself. And we still can take a similar approach in what we do, but we can just see that things have moved on a little bit, and things that once worked don't always work as well as they should do now. We've got reports from various different bodies, and one of the reports I like to look at is the NCSE report, and they did their annual report from 2023. And within that, they explain what has been highlighted, what's been targeted, what types of threats are out there. And the reason they know this information is because they have visibility from a critical national infrastructure perspective. They also have visibility from a GDPR perspective. So when you report to the ICO, for instance, the NCSC have visibility of that. They're a government agency that have visibility of those trends. From that, we can see the things you would expect. So ransomware is still a big problem. Business email compromise is a big problem. Fraud's a big problem. We're seeing artificial intelligence is starting to play a role in the threats and problems. But we're seeing probably a renewed focus on critical national infrastructure, on attacks from hostile nation states. So there's been a significant increase from attacks from Russia, from attacks from North Korea, attacks from China, for instance, and also social engineering attacks, and specifically social engineering enabled by AI. So these are things that they're really worried about. They're not the only people. So if we look at another report, and this is from ENISA, and they look after the cybersecurity risk across the whole of Europe. They recently published a report saying that they don't believe that at the moment any fair elections can take place in the whole of Europe without having some impact and some manipulation by social engineering. Scary thought. You have an election and you will be targeted by AI, you will be targeted by bots, you will be targeted by false information to try to sway the way you vote. And we've seen this practically play out previously. 5 years ago, we saw this play out. So there's some additional risks there that that people are worried about in terms of AI. However, let's look at the things that are slightly more, I would say, personal to a small to medium business. And these are some of the attacks we've seen over the year. And we've got a few spotlights. So one of this is increased attacks on manufacturing and logistics. They've always been a target, but we've seen some real sort of high visibility attacks. One of them in particular was Knights of Old. We had a company that was over 100 years old, had to shut down this year because they were hit so seriously by ransomware that it closed down the business. Another haulier in Wales was also hit. We also see multiple different manufacturing plants. I was listening to a story from a guy who was running a food manufacturing plant, and they were saying as part of the issue is we spent years and years making sure our infrastructure is resilient, so that if a piece of hardware fails, we've still got connectivity. When a cyber attack, that's a bit challenging because actually you want to stop connectivity. So they were telling a story how they had to go around their manufacturing plant and they had people up on ladders pulling switches, and it took them hours because they had to physically go around and remove these pieces of redundancy they'd put in place to keep the plant live. So there's some very real risks which can be unique to you as a business, depending on what you do. We had some attacks which highlighted things like how unsophisticated attacks can be. Using sophisticated technology. And one in particular was the MGM Caesars attack. This just used old-fashioned social engineering. They got some information from a LinkedIn account, pretended to be an employee, got account credentials, got an account unlocked, managed to get access to the environment, and then were able to move across multiple companies. So it really highlights, the impact of supply chain attacks. We have also seen, as I alluded earlier, Microsoft got hit this year. We also saw an attack called MoveIt, which was on a file transfer program, and that was from the Cloip Group. That impacted hundreds of companies. We also saw Okta had a problem. We had 3CX was a phone system that had a problem. These are all big supply chain attacks where we've got software we think is safe and is running safely, and it's being compromised and attacked. And unless we have some kind of behavioral monitoring on an endpoint, these attacks are very difficult to pick up. We also saw AI really having a push this year, and we saw the emergence of different AI models, whether it's OpenAI, ChatGPT, Bard, Bing, DALL-E, Copilot, Anthropic, whatever it might be. There's multiple models out there, but we're seeing generative AI having a huge investment. So there's big money behind it. It's really pushing into 2024, and a lot of companies are getting behind it, and they're hedging their bets that it's going to be a really big deal. So there are intrinsic risks with that. One of them is that we will have employees that are using it whether we are aware of it or not. They'll either be using it for a company environment or they'll be using it outside. And it brings about things like the principles of insider risk. Do you know what's been shared with those tools? So something else we have to think about. We're also seeing that AI, there are tactics being used by threat actors. Threat actors are exploiting artificial intelligence. They're exploiting the fact that you can create bots which are far better at attacking people. They're exploiting the ability for generative AI to create natural language. So ransomware emails are looking a lot more realistic. Yeah, the language that's used has less spelling mistakes. It's been translated into other languages much more effectively than it would do normally. And we've seen that bot traffic quadruple this year. Since AI has started to come into play, ransom business email attacks, which can then lead to ransomware and anything else, we've seen a quadruple in those attacks and the amount of traffic coming from bots over Q1 to Q2. That brings us sort of neatly into the future. Started talking about some of the principles of things like artificial intelligence and where that brings us to. And there's a few things. So 2024 and beyond. Few predictions I'm going to make, things that I think are going to be relevant this year and into beyond. First, I kind of alluded to that, and maybe not individual as your companies, something that you need to be thinking about, but it is an interesting thing to highlight that there is, everybody is really from a threat perspective is predicting there's going to be state-sponsored involvement in elections. And I would pay specific attention to the US election this year. I think that technology is going to play a part with that, and social media is going to play a part in that. We've seen X, because they don't have much in the way of moderation in terms of what gets released. They have been targeted by cyber threat actors for creating social media posts that are trying to manipulate people because it's not moderated. So it's a very easy platform for people to use. So I strongly suspect we're going to see that kind of involvement this year. We will see a huge increase in phishing and ransomware attacks in general. And the reason because of that is, as I talked about, the bots that are out there are now powered by generative AI. And you can have as much as AI can increase the efficiency for what we do in terms of our operations, it can also increase the efficiency of what a threat actor does. So they can automate a large part of what they do. You can have automated emails going out. You can have automatic testing of people's defenses, trying out password combinations, for instance. And we're seeing already a big increase in the attacks. Now, they're not necessarily new attacks or any more sophisticated, but the quantity is seriously going up. So you're much, much more likely. And I think the important bit, an interesting piece here is it also doesn't matter what type of company you are. These bots are just going to be running from a list. So if you are exploitable, if they can get in, they will test your defenses. Yeah, whether they think you've got something that's of value behind those defenses or not. We'll see more supply chain attacks. That's just going to keep on going, sadly. And what that really highlights is the need for layered security approaches. So layered security is when one level of security fails, another layer can pick up that failure. And that's essential in supply chain attacks, because supply chain attacks take the principle that you have a trusted application, something that you use and think is good and fine, and you need another layer of security to pick up when that's being compromised. There's likely to be some kind of unexpected breakthrough in technology. We see this all the time. We see in the media we see media posts saying this piece of technology has moved forward. General AI is now a thing. It's probably not, but it sells a lot of papers and it drives share prices. We'll also see things like quantum computing, robotics. Take your pick. There could be other stuff that are not listed there. And then ultimately, as well, because of this and the result of all these things, we're seeing a big shift towards increased regulation and how you can control some of these new threats. And regulation means that you need to take a more risk-based approach to how you look after your cybersecurity. Just to sort of highlight a few of those things, the quantum threat. So what are we talking about quantum computing? Why is this relevant? Well, quantum computing is really relevant because of encryption. So encryption is how we store our data in a secure way, and encryption is also how we transfer our data in a secure way. And up until now, most of those encryption standards have worked off the principle that In order to break that encryption, you need an incredibly powerful computer. Well, quantum computers are that powerful computer. So at the point when quantum computers become mainstream, encryption will have to change. And there are new encryption standards, quantum encryption standards, and they'll come about. This is not something to worry about. There will be time to react on this. Quantum computers are incredibly expensive. The types of computer that would be needed to crack quantum encryption are incredibly powerful and out of reach at the moment. But there could be a breakthrough at any time. But the point is, we always see this type of stuff on the horizon. This is one of these things on the horizon. Supply chain threats. I think that this year we're going to see supply chain threats and insider threats reach a tipping point where they're going to be a significant problem within your organization. And the reason being is we've already seen an increase of attacks. And I think a lot of this comes down to AI and automation. And it's on two folds. One of them is that we've got bots, which are going to be testing your defenses, reaching out, trying to attack you. We've seen recently the water authorities all over Northern America have been hit by takeover attacks, which have been targeting the ICS control systems. So these are the control systems that control things like the manufacturing plant or switch or dials or valves, and people have been remoting into them. And they've been doing it from a hostile nation state perspective, and they've been doing that en masse. We'll also see within companies, more and more people are going to be using AI and automation. Now, the one thing about AI and automation is that if you don't know what it's going to do, you can introduce threats you didn't think about and risks and challenges. And at the moment, AI doesn't solve for that. You know, automation's been around for some time now, 20 plus years. But if you make it easier for someone to be able to automate it and they don't do any testing to see what the outcome of that is, you are naturally going to increase the risk that you create an insider threat within your organization, an accidental insider threat. So even if they didn't intentionally mean to share some information they shouldn't have done, you could very easily accidentally do that with AI and automation. We will see the regulations take effect this year or start to take effect. Again, there's going to be time to respond to these things, but the regulations are in the works. And we've got the EU AI Act. That has been pretty much established now as to what that's going to look like. And that's coming into play to make sure that companies that are producing AI are regulated in some way. They're thinking about the impact of what the software does. They're thinking about developing in a safe way. They're thinking about, if I employ this technology, am I compromising the rights and freedoms of people? We had in this country not too long ago, we had a lot of uproar about the police using facial recognition systems. That's one of the things that have been outlawed in the new EU AI Act. You can't use artificial intelligence for facial recognition for law enforcement. There are things that they're thinking about in these terms. There are some guidelines around companies that are developing AI. So CISA and NCSC have now put together guidelines on what you should be thinking about if you're developing AI applications. So making sure you're using them responsibly, you're assuring that your AI systems are controlled by good principles of developer practice and governance, so they can't be exploited. You're protecting your infrastructure from manipulation, and you're protecting the rights and freedoms of individuals. So these are all sort of good principles that you should have, and they are being thought about. What can we do though? So that's what's happening at a regulatory or a sort of macro global scale, but we also want to think about what we can do individually. Two things really from my perspective. One is there's a lot of complexity to everything we just went through. It looks like this really big, horrible problem where there's all sorts of challenges, but we can break down these principles into risk, and we can map out what good looks like. And there are a number of cybersecurity frameworks that do that. So there's a few listed on the page there. So CIS, ISO, NIST, Cyber Essentials. And these all outline what good cyber hygiene should look like within your organization. This is backed up by the likes of Gartner that says this is going to become a cost of doing business as time goes on. 60% of organizations are going to use cybersecurity risk as a measure for whether you can work with somebody. And if you think about it, that supply chain compromise I talked about is part of the driving force behind this. Where lots of suppliers are getting compromised, you want to understand that they've got a layered risk-based security approach, and this helps with that. In addition to that, focus on resilience. Risks and threats are going to change as technology changes. They always do. Resilience is your measure of your ability to that change. So if you've got a layered security approach, you're going to be more resilient. So rather than worry about, is quantum computing going to become an issue this year? Is AI going to become an issue this year? Is insider threats going to become an issue this year? Have a risk-based approach to cybersecurity and resilience in mind. So if you did have a risk was exploited, how would you respond to that? Could you carry on doing business? Cybersecurity landscape is going to keep on changing and evolving. As we saw in that history, new things are going to happen at different milestones. And that's because how we work changes and the technology we use changes. Arguably, AI is going to change a huge amount in terms of the technology we use, and that's going to bring new risks. But just think about that resilience. I'm going to hand back over to Jason now. Want to talk about maybe some things that you can do in terms of your cyber resilience journey and strategy.
Wow, thanks very much, Leigh. Very insightful there. I hope everybody found that worthwhile and can take something away from that. So thanks again, Leigh. I guess from a cyber resilience perspective, I think obviously everyone here is going to be potentially at a different stage in their sort of cybersecurity journey. Some of you are going to have bases covered. Some of you might be relatively new to that kind of cybersecurity planning process. So with that, sort of expanding on kind of cyber resilience, being a bit more cyber resilient, we've just put a few slides together here. So 5 steps really that you can take to kind of improve your cybersecurity posture. So the first one I wanted to mention was just looking at understanding where your critical data resides and also who you're sharing that data with. So from a threat actor's, a cyber criminal's perspective, it's essentially the crown jewels. So understanding where that data sits is uber important. So firstly, just conduct a review of where that data sat. Again, it's across endpoints, desktops, laptops, servers, and I think more frequently now mobile devices are in play. So these sort of innocuous small device that you might have on your desk, but actually it's got access to all sorts of information. Understand your cloud-based applications that you're using. As Leigh mentioned earlier on, we're putting our trust in these cloud systems, just assuming, never assume that the app that you're using is secure and safe. It's understanding that if you're going to put sensitive data somewhere, make sure that wherever you're storing it is actually, you're doing your due diligence on that application. Understand how your contractors, your outsourcing partners, your vendors that you're working with, how are they controlling the data that you're sharing with them? How do you protect that data? That's the first step really to kind of look at your risk, I suppose. And moving on to risk, it's really about sort of being proactive, I suppose, in assessing your risk. It's looking at the right tools, technologies, and techniques that you can implement to stay kind of one step ahead of the cyber criminals. For example, some people here, you might still be using traditional AV, antivirus. In our eyes, it doesn't really cut the mustard anymore. It's been around for years and years. Threats are becoming increasingly more sophisticated. So, we need to have this kind of comprehensive cyber threat intelligence capability to sort of rapidly identify, detect, and respond to threats. That's where endpoint detection and response, having a security operations team monitoring and managing your endpoints on a 24/7 basis is really, really important. Looking at something, I did an exercise based on the attendees on today's meeting. So based on obviously 30 odd people we've got here, but based on people that registered, we plumbed in the domain names of registrants into our dark web monitoring platform. And unsurprisingly, we found well over 1,100 unique email IDs and passwords for individuals at organizations that you guys are attending on this webinar today. What we also found was some passwords were exposed in 2017 in various breaches. And actually on the report that we found that we ran, some of the individuals are still using the same password that they were using in 2017, and the same password is still popping up in a breach from April last year. So again, being proactive, assessing your risk, monitoring, alerting, carrying out vulnerability scans is paramount to kind of that sort of continuous process. Raising awareness. So we're all on this webinar today, which is fantastic. It's great. We can raise awareness of cybersecurity. Do it internally. Do it. Build that culture of cybersecurity awareness within your organisation. Educate your users. They're the strong first and last line of defence in cyber. 95% of all cyber issues, it's a well-known fact that can be tracked back to human error, whether that's someone clicking a malicious link on an email. So I think looking at educating users, the biggest piece that we see, I think, is implementing a sort of simulated threat platform. So this is actually putting in a security awareness platform to sort of drive user awareness and engagement. You can run simulated phishing campaigns, better educate users, get the statistics from that, drive training to end users that may have inadvertently clicked that link. The threats that we're getting, that we're seeing through email now, and as Leigh was mentioning earlier about the sort of use of generative AI, these guys are composing really great emails now that you can't spot. There's no grammatical or spelling errors anymore in these emails. So, to the unaware, they're just a regular email that someone's going to click through. Plan for the inevitable. So you may have or you may not have a backup and disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, but make sure you've got the basics in place. Make sure, as I said in sort of slide one, you've identified your critical data, but how's it backed up? Most people here will have some form of cloud solution that they're using. Maybe most people are using Microsoft 365. Don't make assumptions that Microsoft take care of your data for you. They clearly state they're not responsible for backing up your data. It's your responsibility. So there's still thousands of organizations out there that assume the opposite. They assume just because you put your trust in Microsoft as a provider that they're going to do everything they can to protect your data and back it up for you. That's simply not the case. So if you are backing up your data, how critical and confident are you that it's being backed up properly? How confident are you that you can recover from a backup? When was the last test restore that you carried out? Think about how long it would take to get back to an acceptable operational state in the event of a disaster or loss. How would you deal with an ongoing incident? Who coordinates that response and remediation? You need to start somewhere. If you've got nothing, then this is the place to start. Basic elements of a good sort of BDR, BCP strategy. If you're doing nothing, implement the fundamentals. If you're struggling with a place to start, many businesses, look at cybersecurity as a huge project. Don't know where to start. Let's start with the fundamentals. So, basic security hygiene still protects against 99% of cyber attacks. So whether that's implementing something like multi-factor authentication, you'd be surprised at the number of businesses that we see that come to us that don't have MFA enabled on all accounts. It used to be just administrative accounts, but all accounts. If you want to start somewhere on that journey, or you want to gauge where you're at as a business in terms of your sort of strategy, just look at something like Cyber Essentials as your starting point. It's a great baseline to start with. It's a tick box exercise, but it gets you into the process of becoming more cyber aware, cyber resilient. How can we help? So we have a 3-step process. We start with a sort of comprehensive cybersecurity assessment. That's going to uncover weaknesses and vulnerabilities in your infrastructure. It's going to benchmark your organization against those of a similar size and industry. Out the back of that, we then create a tailored report, a strategic plan, if you like, an action plan to address each of those risks, and then work with you to sort of transform your business from a security perspective, become more cyber resilient. So we implement that action plan. We work with you to put those remediation steps in place, and then obviously it's not just a single exercise. It's then an ongoing process to proactively assess your sort of ongoing risks and ensure that you stay as cyber resilient as possible. Some further reading information. Leigh obviously mentioned earlier NIST, the NCSC. I've talked about Cyber Essentials, so some useful links there. There's a wealth of information on these sites, and obviously you can visit our website and click on our sort of cybersecurity area, which will give you a bit more insight into the other products and services that we have. So I think Charlie, hopefully you can make these kind of links available in the chat so that people can visit those.
Yes, I'll put those all in there now.
Perfect. And finally, just to say a big thanks again to Leigh and to ConnectWise for sort of helping support the webinar here. I hope everybody found it useful, and as I said earlier, can take some stuff away with them from this. Thank you very much to Charlie for organising. Great work. I hope, as I say, again, hope you all found it worthwhile, giving you some sort of food for thought for your cybersecurity journey. But as I say, as the slide says, feel free, please, to reach out to Charlie if you need any more information, or if you've got any concerns about cybersecurity. Obviously, you can always visit our website for some more information. Other than that, just to say thank you very much again. Have a great day all, and thank you.
Thank you very much, all.
Thanks very much, guys.